in terms of regional peace for Europe, I think the European Union project of itself is a very good example and has shown the immense role that trade and economic development can play in regional stability and promoting peace. The US is the European Union's largest trading partner. Two-way trade in goods and services across the Atlantic is worth more than $100 billion every year. And that we actively work to get that trading relationship flourishing again, I think will be important in the recovery of both economies over the next year or two. So I think that these familial, cultural and trading ties between Europe and the United States have led to similarities in outlook and in particular in terms of our foreign policy, that there are basic values that we share. But we don't always agree, and we never will agree on every single issue. There are shared values. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that even within the EU itself, even though we're all European and we should be maybe have a more similar outlook, there are very few issues on which all the constituent parts of the European Union absolutely agree. And we have to work very hard towards compromise and cooperation and patience on a lot of issues. And I think that's maybe an important point that sometimes is lost maybe in the United States, that where the EU is just seen as one bloc. It's one bloc made up of many constituent pieces, and there can be difficulties in trying to get those constituent pieces to agree on any one issue. The EU's common foreign and security policy, and within that the security and defence policy, focuses on supporting international peace and security, the resolution of conflict and international development in accordance with the UN Charter. And I think for the most part this coincides with the basic values of US foreign policy, though of course there are differences. And obviously there have been high profile and very difficult divergences, such as for example the positions on the International Criminal Court and Guantanamo Bay. And also, particularly in the current climate, there are voices in the US who say that the EU needs to do much more to support the US militarily in Afghanistan. But I think that it's too simplistic to define the entirety of the foreign policy relationship between the EU and the US in terms of some kind of like a tit-for-tat argument that we need to give you more soldiers for Afghanistan and you need to give us missile defence. I think the reality is that it's much more complex, it's much more intertwined, and for all the issues that might get media prominence on any given day, there are a whole load of issues on which the EU and the US works very well together in promoting international peace and security. In terms of Afghanistan, some EU members are very some EU members are very heavily committed there with troops, but I think it is important, and again it's something that might be lost sometimes in the United States, that the roles of NATO and the EU are different, and the EU doesn't have a standing army in the traditional sense that we can just deploy a battalion of troops to go to somewhere like Afghanistan. And most EU missions are civilian rather than military. And the EU would normally focus on conflict prevention, on the protection of civilians in conflict zones, and on rebuilding fragile societies in the aftermath of conflict. And EU missions, such as those in Bosnia and Chad, are continuing to do this. So the EU does contribute very strongly to international peace and security, not always in the way that the US would want it to, and not always militarily, but perhaps in a way that is very necessary and that complements the role of the military forces of the US and of NATO. As we face further global challenges like climate change, I think it's an imperative that the EU and the US continue to work together to try and seek to influence those who maybe have a different worldview. And for example, on climate change, who may have not yet come around to the point of view that we need to get some decisions and some real action in Copenhagen. Similarly, I think we need to work together, and to a certain extent are working together towards achieving the shared goal of a more efficient and effective United Nations, which is in the interest not only of the EU and the US, but of the broader international community, in that a robust and transparent and effective UN means that there is a global community, whereas a UN that is failing is in nobody's interest, because it could just lead to kind of separate agendas and to no real kind of universal policeman, for want of a better word, but an impartial or fair universal policeman. As Hesna noted, we also need to work together on international development and, for example, in combating HIV and AIDS. And I think these are all positive areas in our foreign policy relationship that maybe to a certain extent are getting forgotten at the moment, as the focus is on some of the divergences between us. And I think there will always be those who will seek to boil the entirety of the foreign policy relationship between the US and the EU down to whatever the difficulty of the day is. But the reality is that in the complex global world that we're in at the moment, the relationship is much more nuanced. There's an ebb and flow, there's a push and pull, but ultimately we continue to work together, and I don't think we really have an option on that. I mean, even the most solid relationships of any kind are stormy at times, and one party might feel let down, they might feel they've been taken for granted, they might feel a bit unloved, but even phone calls may not be returned, or requests for dates may be turned down, allegedly, we hear. But I think if either the EU or the US was to look for another partner to dip its toe into the international world of online dating in some way, we'd probably find that the alternatives really aren't much better if they exist at all. And I think the EU and the US probably remain the best fit for each other as partners as we seek to work together to fight for a better future, not just for citizens of the EU and the US, but for the global community as we work towards, I guess, a better world that's more stable, more peaceful, and that allows us to focus on the issues like the Millennium Development Goals that maybe get lost sometimes in the clatter and the bang of the politics of the day. So that's it. Thanks very much.